Welcome to History in a Hurry. I'm Professor Malcolm Mazer, and in this episode we will cover the final chapter of World War II, the Battle of Berlin. The Battle of Berlin, fought from April 16th to May 2nd, 1945, was the final major offensive in the European theater of World War II. It marked the decisive defeat of Nazi Germany and the end of Adolf Hitler's regime. As Soviet forces advanced from the east, they launched an all-out assault on the German capital, overwhelming the desperate and depleted German defenses. The battle was one of the bloodiest in history, with intense urban combat, widespread destruction, and massive casualties on both sides. Ultimately, Berlin fell to the Soviet Red Army, Hitler committed suicide, and Germany surrendered unconditionally shortly after, bringing the war in Europe to an end. By early 1945, Germany was on the brink of collapse. The Soviet Red Army had been advancing westward after crushing German forces in the Eastern Front battles of 1944. Meanwhile, Western Allied forces, including the United States and Britain, had crossed the Rhine River and were pushing into Western Germany. However, it was the Soviet Union that would bear the main responsibility for capturing Berlin. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was determined to take the city before the Western Allies, both for strategic reasons and to assert Soviet dominance in post-war Europe. Stalin ordered Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Ivan Konev to lead the assault, resulting in a massive force of over 2.5 million Soviet troops, 6,250 tanks, and more than 40,000 artillery pieces preparing to encircle and storm the city. On April 16, 1945, the Soviets launched their offensive, striking German defensive lines at the Oder River and Seelow Heights, about 50 miles east of Berlin. The Germans, under General Gotthard Heinrici, had fortified the area with trenches, anti-tank obstacles, and artillery positions. However, they were heavily outnumbered and lacked sufficient supplies. Despite fierce resistance, the Soviets broke through after several days of brutal fighting. By April 21st, Soviet forces reached the outskirts of Berlin, and the battle for the city itself began. The defense of Berlin was led by General Helmuth Weidling, commanding a force of about 100,000 German troops, which included remnants of the Wehrmacht, SS divisions, Hitler Youth, and even elderly men from the Volkssturm militia. These forces were poorly equipped and exhausted, facing overwhelming Soviet numbers. In addition to military forces, nearly 2.5 million civilians remained in Berlin, trapped in the chaos of battle. Urban combat in Berlin was intense and devastating. The Soviets used heavy artillery bombardments and aerial attacks to soften German defenses before engaging in street-to-street, building-to-building combat. German defenders used the city's rubble as cover, ambushed Soviet tanks, and launched counterattacks from fortified positions. However, Soviet troops steadily advanced, encircling key districts, including the government quarter where Hitler's Führer bunker was located. As the battle raged on, Hitler refused to leave the city, retreat, or surrender. On April 30th, with Soviet troops closing in on the Reich Chancellery, Hitler and his wife, Eva Braun, committed suicide in his bunker. Their bodies were later burned by loyal officers to prevent them from falling into Soviet hands. The German leadership quickly unraveled, and on May 2nd, General Weidling officially surrendered Berlin to the Soviets. The fall of Berlin resulted in enormous casualties and destruction. The Soviet Red Army suffered over 80,000 dead and 280,000 wounded, while German military and civilian casualties exceeded 100,000 killed and many more wounded. The city itself was left in ruins, with entire districts reduced to rubble. In the aftermath, Soviet forces occupied Berlin, marking the beginning of Soviet control over East Germany. At the same time, the Western Allies took control of West Germany, setting the stage for the Cold War division of Berlin. The capture of Berlin directly led to the unconditional surrender of Germany. On May 7, 1945, Nazi Germany officially surrendered to the Western Allies, followed by a formal surrender to the Soviets on May 8th, now commemorated as Victory in Europe, or VE Day. The battle symbolized the total defeat of the Third Reich and the beginning of a new geopolitical era as the world transitioned from World War II into the Cold War. In conclusion, the Battle of Berlin was the final and most brutal confrontation of World War II in Europe. It marked the destruction of Nazi Germany, the emergence of the Soviet Union as a dominant power, and the geopolitical reshaping of Europe. The battle's legacy remains deeply ingrained in history, serving as a reminder of the immense destruction caused by war and the high price of victory. Thanks for racing through history with us on History in a Hurry. If you enjoyed today's quick dive into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a fast-paced trip through time. Please reply in the comments with ideas for our next history lesson. See you in the next one.